It was up this Chilkoot Valley that the original trail to the Yukon began, ultimately up the Chilkoot Pass, which is about 33 miles from here. And I have no gear and only one knee and may not be able to make that distance, which I won't try this time around. The area abounds with these beautiful, what I guess are wild daffodils. I'll pan now slowly through these trees and daffodils so you can see the view that the thousands upon thousands of stampeders, as they were called, saw as they looked back upon the route that they had taken. That's what they would have seen up through that channel, which brought them up along the same channel that we follow today, going north out of Seattle or San Francisco up through the inland passage of southeast Alaska. This is Slide Cemetery at Chilkoot Pass, well actually Chilkoot Trail in Dyea. After a series of snowstorms, a warm wind apparently softened up the slope, and well over 100 would-be stampeders died in a slide. Some of them died buried in the snow, still in a running position when they were finally uncovered. J.E. Dorn in 1898. Tacoma, April 3rd, 1898. Pennsylvania. Look at this fellow here. A few months later, shot in the mountains. Wonder what the story is behind that. Kansas City gives a rough idea of where these people were from. Baker City, Oregon. Not to demean either these people or anyone else, but there's a bitter irony to cemeteries in the sense that most often gravestones mark people who life and history in no other way will have marked. That most of us buy gravestones because little else will evidence that we have passed. No books, no music, no Steven Spielberg movies, nothing but a few entries in hospital records for birth and an obituary in some newspaper. This is a local cemetery. In other words, one that would have occurred in Dyea, several years after the last one we looked at. It is an irony that human genetics grants us usually less than 80 or 90 years of life, and yet we spend most of our time squandering it. Here was Wilbert Garfield, 16 years, 8 months, from Los Angeles. And even more of an irony, those who never get the chance even to squander it. John J. Mason, born September 1888, died June 16, 1899. Less than a year. Alice Mason died November 16, 1898. She lived 1 year, 2 months. And yet we squander most of our lives. This was the view, again, of that great majority of the earliest gold seekers who used the Chilkoot Trail from Dyea. And just panning across this flat bench that you see up here was the site of the town of Dyea, a great deal of it being continually washed away by this river. This is presently the City Hall. Used to be the courthouse, and originally was the first all-stone building built in Alaska as a woman's college, which I think is interesting. Here's one of my campsites that I found just outside of Skagway, probably not more than a half a mile or a mile outside the city limits. Probably about 30, well no, probably about a quarter of a mile from a campground. There are a lot of terrific places to stay if you just take a moment to stay there, or to look for them rather. And you don't mind being in a place where nobody else is, which to me is the ideal. Here I'm walking down along the river, which is a rugged place. Lots of debris like this and cans and stuff like that. Whether it's recent or not, I don't know. But again, this is some of the view that you can get if you look for it. Right down there where you see a little bit of that smoke coming up, that haze, that's Skagway. Notice the mountains on beneath that, or beyond that. They're on the other side of this inlet that both Skagway and Dyea are on. The infamous trail of 1897 wound up through this deep gorge on our side of the gorge, on the right-hand side somewhere, lost now amidst these trees. And at a later date, a year or so later, was the Bracket Wagon Road, and it wound up right along this little line of trees that you can see right along this point that I'm moving along right now below the railroad train. Finally, on February 20th, 1899, in a mere 18 months, transportation jumped from primitive foot travel, in which over 3,000 horses were killed, if in essence, by the frenzied miners trying to get over this pass. Transportation had leaped to the fastest mode of mass transportation at the time, and that's this narrow gauge railroad. The White Pass and Yukon route. This falls is also on the White Pass Dead Horse route, cascading down from these high snowy peaks. Culminating in this spectacular falls at the bottom. Down beneath the railroad here to the left, way down in there somewhere, was the beginning of Dead Horse Gulch Trail. It was called this and described by Jack London, and he said the following, and I'll read it fairly fast. The horses died like mosquitoes in the first frost, and from Skagway to Bennett they rotted in heaps. They died at the rocks. They were poisoned at the summit, and they starved at the lakes. They fell off the trail, what there was of it, and they went through it. In the river they drowned under the loads or were mashed to pieces against the boulders. They snapped their legs in the crevices and broke their backs, falling backward with their packs. In the sloughs they sank from fright or smothered in the slime, and they were disemboweled in the bogs where the corduroy logs turned end up in the mud. Men shot them, worked them to death, and when they were gone went back to the beach and bought more. Some did not bother to shoot them, stripping the saddles off and the shoes and leaving them where they fell. Their hearts turned to stone, those which did not break, and they became beasts, the men on the Dud Horse Trail. This is Bennett Lake. Most of the really spectacular views that I hope to have had going across were obscured by fog. This is a clouded view of Lake Tutshi, which is roughly in the direction of west, and then it hooks here to the south as we pan around. This would have been traveled either alongside to Bennett or alongside by the railroad. This is the view looking towards the southern direction where the 7,000 boats ended up coming from Skagway on Lake Bennett, or Bennett Lake. This is the town of Carcross. These are some goats outside of Carcross up on the mountains. Strange things are done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold, and the Arctic trails of their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. And the northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge. I cremated Sam McGee. This is Lake Labarge.